the Opium Wars. One might miss this sign as not connected to the current events in the world, but as a pattern of crime it is unmistakable. Two major effects are a creation of mass markets and the generation of enormous, in fact unprecedented, cash flows. The existence of a monopoly, like the opium trade, results in the concentrated accumulation of vast pools of wealth. The accumulations of wealth created by a succession of historic drug trades have been among the primary foundations of global capitalism and the modern nation-state itself. Indeed, it may be argued that the entire rise of the West from 1500 to 1900 depended on a series of drug trades. Underlying all of this, opium rearranged the domestic economies and pushed them down the path of mass consumption, which together with mass production typified the modern economic order. Before there was oil, there was opium. In the 1800s, the Manchu dynasty was trying to stop the growing importation of opium through Turkey and British India by Britain and the United States. Opium smuggling was destroying the Chinese economy and was destroying China's favorable balance of trade, and there was an estimated 2 million Chinese opium addicts. Addiction was especially common around the port city of Canton, where foreign merchants smuggled large quantities of the narcotic drug into China. In 1839, China confiscated and burned the opium, and Britain, in response, occupied Canton. Unable to match the technological military might of England, 3 years later, in 1842, the Chinese agreed to the provisions of the Treaty of Nanking. Hong Kong was ceded to England. America and France approached and secured the same trading rights under the treaty as England. The most favored nation treatment came to be extended so far that China's right to rule in its own territory was limited. This began the period referred to by the Chinese as the time of unequal treaties, a time of unprecedented degradation for China. The humiliation the Central Kingdom suffered is still remembered and strongly affects important aspects of its foreign policy. Meanwhile, the opium trade continued to thrive. The British and French again defeated China in a second opium war in 1856. By the terms of the Treaty of Tientsin, 1858, the Chinese opened new ports of trading and allowed foreigners with passports to travel in the interior. Christians gained the right to spread their faith and hold property, thus opening up another means of Western penetration. The United States and Russia gained the same privileges in separate treaties. In 1858, the Chinese government, bowing to British demands, reluctantly legalized the importation of opium, allowing up to 200 cases of opium to be brought into the ports to keep the addiction and the money flowing. The Chinese have never forgiven the West for these events. It led to Mao and communism to reform and restore their sovereignty, change the balance of trade, and remove the West. And of course, that balance of trade has changed of late, and now it is China that provides China white heroin to the United States via Mexico into airports in Florida and Arkansas. The recent trouble in Myanmar is more understandable under this filter as well. It has little to do with civil rights. The second most important drug addiction was started in 1859, only a year after China agreed to legalize opium importation. Oil. Oil was discovered in Pennsylvania. The discovery of new U.S. oil fields had peaked in the 1930s, and exploration in the Middle East identified huge pools in Saudi Arabia to Iran. The production of crude oil in the contiguous 48 states peaked in 1970, and major development moved to the Middle East with partnerships with Arab states. Our current elected leaders were all involved in oil before they were in the executive branch, and have remained closely tied to oil during their terms. Karzai, the president of Afghanistan, worked for Unocal. Bush, well, several failed oil companies the Kuwaitis bailed him out of. Rice worked for Chevron. Condoleezza even has a supertanker named after her. And of course, Dick Cheney, who received a $34 million going-away present from his last job at Halliburton. The year 2000 very likely will stand historically as the year of greatest oil production at its lowest price, $24 per barrel. And the Middle East holds the largest portion of the last reserves. Opium and oil are the two commodities of value in the trade of powerful nations for wealth building by the elite families controlling the Federal Reserve and international banking, regardless of their philosophical leanings. When a third party interrupts this stream of wealth, war is always the result. The enemy of our enemy is our friend. The World Trade Center was the epicenter of Western banking and global commerce, with its foot deeply seated in the Western corporate plunder of world resources. Not commonly known is that the land in New York where the UN was built is owned by the Rockefellers, and the land where the World Trade Center sat is still owned by the Rockefellers. The nicknames for the Twin Towers when they were erected were Nelson and David. And then came the attacks in New York on 9/11. And unlike opium, oil is not a renewable resource, but both sources are co-located in a third-party region, and perhaps why their countries are called third world countries. The French-American Foundation, with its charter members Hillary and Bill Clinton and their association with organized crime centered in Canada, the Chinese banking and Chinese heroin brought into Arkansas, along with Maurice Strong, who is living in China to avoid prosecution for his part in the oil for food scam in Iraq, and Al Gore pushing carbon taxes for his investment fund Generation Investments, are working hard to enact their next move.
The World Federalist Association, or WFA, is one of the largest organizations that openly promote world government. Periodically, the WFA extends a Global Governance Award to a prominent individual pushing for the same goal. Former CBS anchorman Walter Cronkite was among the recipients of the WFA award.
Thank you very much. Today we must develop federal structures on a global level to deal with world problems. We need a system of enforceable world law, a democratic federal world government.
In a closed-circuit lookup, Hillary Clinton congratulated Cronkite.
For decades you told us the way it is. But tonight, we honor you for fighting for the way it could be.
And I've really been impressed by how serious people are, because we all need to be part of the discussion if we're all going to be part of the solution. I don't want people who already agree with me. I want honest, experienced, hardworking, patriotic people who want to be part of a team, the American team. I hope you've learned a little bit more about what I'm believing and trying to do, and really helped this conversation about our country to get started.
I hope to keep this conversation going all the way to November 2008.